Picture this. The most important political chamber in the known galaxy. We're talking about Concordia Prime. A space station so massive it has its own weather patterns and so shiny you need sunglasses just to look at the thing. The Galactic Council chambers sit right at the heart of this monument to bureaucratic excess. Complete with floating platforms, holographic displays that nobody really understands, and enough marble to build a small moon. For the past 3,000 years, this has been where the galaxy's elite species have gathered to make very important decisions. And by very important decisions I mean they've spent most of their time arguing about trade regulations and whose turn it is to host the annual diplomatic gala. Today's session features all the usual suspects. There's Ambassador Vextar, a 7-foot-tall reptilian, whose scales shimmer with an oily rainbow sheen that somehow manages to make him look both magnificent and deeply untrustworthy. He's got the kind of forked tongue that was literally designed for speaking out of both sides of his mouth, and he's never met a sentence he couldn't make 3 times longer and 5 times more confusing. Then we have Captain Zilthos, representing the Corvin hegemony. If central casting needed someone to play generic alien warrior, they'd call Zilthos. He's got 4 arms, 6 eyes and an ego that could power a small star. His species has been conquering things for so long they've actually run out of things worth conquering, so now they just reconquer the same planets over and over again for sport. The chamber is filled with dozens of other species, each more elaborate than the last. There are the crystalline Zelkari who communicate through light patterns that look like a disco had a seizure. The gaseous nebulans float around in containment suits that make them look like living lava lamps. And don't get me started on the hive mind representatives who insist on speaking in unison because apparently individual thoughts are so last millennium. For 3,000 years these beings have considered themselves the pinnacle of galactic civilization. They've got technology that can fold space, weapons that can crack planets, and art forms that exist in dimensions humans can't even perceive. They've been running this galaxy, like they invented the concept of intelligence itself. And then after millennia of cosmic smugness, they decided to invite humanity to join their little club. Not because they respected us, mind you. Oh no, that would be giving us too much credit. See, there's this tiny clause in the Galactic Charter about inclusive representation that some long-dead bureaucrats slipped in during the paperwork phase. Apparently any species that achieves faster than light travel gets a seat at the big table. It's like a cosmic participation trophy. The council had been hoping humans would just blow themselves up before figuring out warp drive, but unfortunately for them, we're too stubborn to die and too curious to stay put. So here we are, the newest and most reluctant members of the Galactic Council, represented by one man who looks like he just rolled out of bed. Enter Jake Morrison, humanity's lone ambassador to the galaxy. While every other species has sent their finest specimens draped in ceremonial robes, bioluminescent body paint, or full military regalia, Jake showed up wearing jeans, a polo shirt and sneakers that have definitely seen better days. He's got the kind of relaxed posture that suggests he either doesn't understand the magnitude of this moment, or he understands it perfectly and just doesn't care. The other ambassadors keep shooting glances at him like he's a particularly interesting zoo exhibit. Here's this primitive little mammal, sitting in a chamber where civilizations rise and fall based on the decisions made, and he looks like he's waiting for a bus. But that's humans for you. We've got this annoying habit of showing up exactly as we are, whether you like it or not. The session begins with Omnarch, the council leader, rising from his throne. And yes, it's literally a throne, because apparently when you're running a galactic democracy, the first thing you need is a really big chair. Omnarch belongs to the Ethereal Collective, which means he's basically a tall glowing blue humanoid, who thinks he's better than everyone else, because he can photosynthesize. He's got this habit of speaking in what he probably thinks is a wise, measured tone, but really just sounds like he's explaining quantum physics to a toddler. Welcome, beings of the galaxy. Omnarch intones, his voice carrying that special kind of authority that comes from never having been told to shut up. Today marks a historic moment, as we welcome our newest member to this august body, the species known as. He pauses here, consulting his notes like he's trying to remember how to pronounce a particularly difficult menu item, humans. The way he says it makes it sound like some kind of exotic disease. We gather here to honor the brave little civilization that has, against all odds, managed to achieve faster than light travel without immediately destroying themselves. Scattered applause ripples through the chamber, the kind of polite clapping you'd give a child who just tied their shoes for the first time. Ambassador Vextar rises next, his scales catching the light in a way that's probably supposed to be impressive, but mostly just looks like he's covered in motor oil. Indeed, Omnarch, the human species has shown remarkable tenacity in their quaint little corner of the galaxy. Why, just last century they were still using chemical rockets. Chemical rockets, can you imagine? He lets out a sound that might be laughter if you've never heard actual laughter before. Their attempts at space exploration have been adorable, really. They built this tiny little space station and were so proud of it. Of course it's roughly the size of a storage closet compared to our facilities, but we mustn't discourage the little ones, must we? Captain Zilthos decides it's his turn to contribute to the condescension festival. All four of his arms gesture dramatically as he speaks, because apparently one arm isn't enough to contain his ego. My people have conquered 47 star systems across the galaxy. We have mastered the art of warfare on a scale these humans cannot even comprehend. Their largest conflicts involved maybe a few million individuals. We once had a battle that lasted 3 centuries and involved the entire populations of 12 worlds. He pauses to let this sink in, probably expecting impressed murmurs. What he gets instead is the sound of someone unwrapping what appears to be a sandwich. Everyone turns to look at Jake, who has indeed produced a sandwich from somewhere, and is examining it with the kind of careful attention most species reserve for peace treaties. He notices everyone staring and looks up with the expression of someone who's just realized he forgot to mute himself on a conference call. Sorry, he says, taking a bite. Didn't have time for lunch. Please, continue with the conquering stories. The aliens exchange glances that somehow manage to be both horrified and fascinated. Here they are discussing the grand scope of galactic civilization, and this human is eating what appears to be peanut butter and jelly. Omnarch clears his throat, which is quite an achievement considering he doesn't technically have one. Yes, well perhaps we should explain to our new member how the council operates. You see, young human, we have spent millennia perfecting the art of galactic governance. Each species brings their unique expertise to the table. The Zelkari provide us with their crystalline wisdom, he continues, gesturing to the disco ball aliens who flash in acknowledgement. The Corvins offer their military prowess. The Ethereals contribute our philosophical insights. The Vextari handle our diplomatic relations. Each species has found their place in the grand tapestry of galactic civilization. Jake nods along while chewing, occasionally jotting something down on what everyone now realizes is definitely a paper napkin. A paper napkin. In a chamber where most species take notes by downloading information directly into their neural implants or crystallizing thoughts into permanent memory matrices. Fascinating note-taking method, Vextar observes, his voice dripping with the kind of politeness that's actually an insult wearing a tuxedo. Very primitive, I mean traditional. We respect your cultural practices, of course. It's efficient, Jake replies, stuffing the napkin back in his pocket. Plus it doesn't need batteries. The silence that follows this statement is the kind of silence that makes you wonder if everyone in the room has simultaneously forgotten how to breathe. These are species that have harnessed the power of stars, bent the laws of physics to their will, and created art forms that exist in 11 dimensions. And here's this human, defending paper napkins. Omnarch recovers first, probably because he's had the most practice at pretending things aren't completely insane. Yes. Well, we look forward to seeing what unique perspective humanity brings to our deliberations. Now shall we proceed to today's agenda? First order of business, Omnarch announces, pulling up a holographic display that's so complex it looks like someone threw a rainbow at a math equation. We must assign our newest member their role within the galactic community. The display shifts to show what appears to be an organizational chart, if organizational charts were designed by someone having a fever dream. There are hundreds of boxes connected by lines that curve through 3-dimensional space, each representing different galactic responsibilities. After careful deliberation, Vextar says, rising again because apparently sitting down for more than 5 minutes would damage his dignity, we have determined that humanity would be best suited for waste management coordination in the Outer Rim territories. Jake looks up from his sandwich. Garbage collection, waste management coordination, Vextar corrects with the kind of emphasis that suggests this distinction is very important to him. It's a vital service that requires, let's say, a less sophisticated approach, perfect for your species' current developmental level. How thoughtful, Jake says, and you can't quite tell if he's being sarcastic or genuinely appreciative. That's the thing about humans. We're really hard to read sometimes. Now then, Omnarch continues. Let us address the current issues facing our galactic community. First we have the ongoing Zentari trade dispute. The holographic display shifts to show a complex web of trade routes, with several key pathways highlighted in angry red. This conflict has been raging for approximately 200 standard years. The Zentari Federation refuses to acknowledge the legitimacy of the Rigel Commerce Guild's exclusive trading rights in the Beta sector. Captain Zilthos leans forward, his 6 eyes gleaming with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for discussing other people's problems. My military analysts have prepared a comprehensive 17-phase battle plan that would resolve this dispute through strategic occupation of key trading posts. We estimate only minimal casualties, perhaps 3 to 4 billion beings. With respect to the captain's direct approach, Vextar interjects. The diplomatic corps has developed a more nuanced solution. We propose a series of negotiations involving 47 different mediating parties, each representing various aspects of interstellar commerce law. The process should take no more than 3 to 4 centuries. Jake finishes his sandwich and wipes his hands on another napkin. He's apparently got an entire supply of them. Next, Omnarch says, we have the Gamma Quadrant piracy situation. The display now shows a star map dotted with little skull icons, because apparently even advanced alien civilizations can't resist a good pirate symbol. Raids on merchant vessels have increased by 400% over the past decade. Our previous 12 military interventions have been less successful than hoped. The pirates have proven surprisingly adaptable, Zilthos admits, which is probably the first time in his life he's admitted anything was surprising. They appear to have developed some form of tactical innovation that allows them to anticipate our standard battle formations. Our intelligence suggests, Vexstar adds, that they may be using some form of primitive cunning, very difficult to counter with conventional strategy. Finally, Omnarch says, gesturing to what looks like a legal document the size of a small planet, we have the nebula mining rights controversy. The legal teams have been working on this for 67 years now, and we're expecting a preliminary ruling within the next century. Jake has been listening to all of this while taking notes on his napkin. Occasionally he nods, sometimes he tilts his head like he's thinking, but mostly he just looks like someone who's trying to follow a conversation that's being held in a foreign language. The complexity of these issues, Omnarch explains with the patience of someone talking to a particularly slow child, demonstrates why galactic governance requires such sophisticated civilizations. Each problem has multiple layers of political, economic and cultural considerations that must be carefully balanced. Indeed, Vexstar agrees. The delicate art of interstellar diplomacy cannot be rushed. These matters require the kind of nuanced thinking that comes only from millennia of experience. Zilthos pounds the table with 2 of his 4 fists. What they require is decisive action, swift, overwhelming force applied at precisely the right moment, which is exactly the kind of thinking that created half these problems in the first place. Vexstar shoots back, his scales rippling with irritation. Gentlemen, Omnarch intervenes before the argument can escalate into the kind of diplomatic incident that usually ends with someone declaring war. Perhaps we should ask our newest member for their thoughts. After all, fresh perspectives can sometimes offer. He pauses, clearly struggling to find a diplomatic way to say simplistic solutions for simple minds, uncomplicated insights. All eyes turn to Jake, who's been folding his napkin into what appears to be a small paper airplane. He looks up, realizes everyone's waiting for him to say something, and glances back down at his napkin notes. Well, he says slowly, I might be missing something here, but he pauses, looking around the chamber at all these incredibly advanced alien civilizations. Has anyone tried just talking to them? The silence that follows is so complete you could hear a photon drop. Every alien in the chamber is staring at Jake like he just suggested they solve their transportation problems by flapping their arms really hard. Talking to whom? Omnarch finally asks, his voice carefully neutral. Any of them, Jake says, apparently not noticing that he's just committed some kind of galactic blasphemy. The Zentari people, the pirates, the mining companies. Has anyone actually asked them what they want? The silence gets deeper. Somewhere in the chamber, you can practically hear the sound of alien minds trying to process this concept. Vexstar is the first to recover, though his scales have shifted to a color that probably indicates either confusion or mild nausea. I'm sorry. Could you clarify what you mean by talking to them? Jake looks around the chamber like he's trying to figure out if this is some kind of test. You know, communication? Finding out what they actually want instead of assuming you know what they want. But we have detailed psychological profiles. Omnarch protests, gesturing to a display that shows what looks like a family tree designed by someone on hallucinogens. We've analyzed their behavioral patterns, their cultural matrices, their economic motivations. Sure, Jake says, unfolding his napkin and smoothing it out on the table. But have you asked them? Captain Zilthos makes a sound that might be laughter if laughter was a war crime. Young human, you cannot simply walk up to your enemies and ask them what they want. That's not how conflicts work. Why not? The question hangs in the air like someone just asked why water is wet. Zilthos opens his mouth, closes it, then opens it again. His 6 eyes blink in sequence, which is probably the alien equivalent of a system crash. Because, Zilthos starts, then stops. Because you don't, because it's not protocol. Vexstar jumps in, apparently deciding to rescue his colleague from this logical quicksand. There are proper channels, established procedures. You can't just bypass centuries of diplomatic framework. Jake nods thoughtfully, like this makes perfect sense to him. Then he looks down at his napkin, which everyone now realizes is covered in what appears to be a hand-drawn flowchart. A very simple hand-drawn flowchart. Okay, So let me see if I understand this correctly, Jake says, holding up the napkin. The Centauri trade dispute. You've got two groups fighting over who gets to control trade routes, right? Grossly oversimplified, but essentially correct, Vexstar confirms. And this has been going on for 200 years because the fundamental question of territorial commerce rights in contested space requires extensive legal precedent, and because nobody's asked the Centauri what they actually want. Jake interrupts gently. I mean, what if they don't care about the trade routes? What if they're fighting about something completely different? Omnarch's glow flickers, which is either a sign of deep thought or an electrical malfunction. The Centauri Federation has clearly stated their position in 17 different diplomatic communiques, written by diplomats, to diplomats, using diplomat language, Jake says. But what if you just asked a regular Centauri person, hey, what's this fight actually about? He looks around the chamber, and for the first time since arriving, he doesn't look like someone who's out of place. He looks like someone who's genuinely curious about the answer. I spent some time reading about Centauri culture before coming here, Jake continues, consulting his napkin again. Turns out they're incredibly proud of their artistic traditions. They've got this whole thing about being the galaxy's greatest poets and philosophers, but nobody talks about that. Everyone just focuses on their trade capabilities. Vexstar's scales shift to a new color entirely. You're suggesting that a 2-century trade war is actually about poetry. I'm suggesting maybe it's worth finding out, Jake says. What if they don't want to control the trade routes? What if they want recognition for something else entirely? What if they're fighting because they feel like nobody respects them for what they actually care about? The chamber is so quiet you could hear a quasar burp. These are civilizations that have mastered faster than light travel, created artificial intelligence, and built structures that can be seen from other galaxies. And they're all staring at a human who just suggested that maybe, just maybe, people fight about things other than what they say they're fighting about. Moving on to the piracy situation, Jake says, apparently oblivious to the existential crisis he's just triggered. You said these pirates have been getting more successful, right? And that they're using some kind of primitive cunning that's hard to counter. Zilphos nods slowly, like he's not sure where this is going but he's afraid to find out. What if they're not pirates? I beg your pardon. Zilphos manages. What if they're not actually pirates? What if they're just people who need something, and this is the only way they can get it? Jake looks down at his napkin again. I did some checking on the Gamma Quadrant. Turns out there used to be a massive mining operation out there about 15 years ago. Employed millions of people. Then the mines played out, the companies left, and suddenly you've got millions of unemployed people with families to feed and bills to pay. The silence is getting uncomfortable now. You can practically see the gears turning in alien minds that haven't had to process this kind of logic in centuries. So instead of being career criminals, Jake continues, they might just be desperate people doing the only thing they can think of to survive. In which case, shooting at them isn't going to solve the problem. It's just going to make them more desperate. What are you suggesting? Omnarch asks, and his voice has lost that condescending tone entirely. Give them jobs, Jake says, like this is the most obvious thing in the world. You've got a galaxy full of legitimate work that needs doing. Mining operations on other worlds, construction projects, cargo transport. Instead of spending billions on military campaigns that don't work, spend that money on employment programs. Zilphos looks like someone just told him that war is optional. You want to offer jobs to pirates. I want to offer jobs to unemployed people, Jake corrects. Some of whom happen to be pirating ships because they don't see any other choice. And the mining rights situation? Vexstar asks, though he sounds like he's not sure he wants to know the answer. Jake unfolds another section of his napkin, revealing what appears to be a simple calendar grid. 67 years of legal battles over who gets permanent control of the mining sites. What if nobody gets permanent control? Explain. Rotation system. Each company gets access for say 5-year periods. Then it rotates to the next company. Everyone gets a turn, nobody gets permanent ownership, and you don't need to spend decades fighting about it. The holographic displays around the chamber flicker and dim, as if the computers themselves are having trouble processing these concepts. Here are problems that have consumed centuries of debate, millions of hours of legal work, and countless resources. And this human just suggested solutions that could fit on a napkin. These ideas are, Omnarch begins, then stops. His glow is flickering in patterns that suggest either deep contemplation or a complete system failure. Impossibly naive, Vexstar finishes, but there's no conviction in his voice. Dangerously simplistic, Zilphos adds. though he's staring at Jake's napkin like it contains the secrets of the universe. Jake shrugs. Maybe. But they're also cheap, fast, and they address what people actually want instead of what we think they should want. Sometimes the simple answer is simple because it's right. He folds up his napkin and puts it back in his pocket. Anyway, that's just what occurred to me while listening. I'm sure you all know better than I do. The chamber remains silent. Outside the massive windows, stars wheel in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the fact that somewhere in a floating conference room, the basic assumptions underlying galactic civilization are quietly falling apart. 3 months later, the emergency session of the Galactic Council convenes at what most species would consider an ungodly hour, but which for the Council has become standard operating procedure. Nobody's been sleeping well lately. The chamber looks the same, but the atmosphere has changed completely. Where once there was pompous confidence, now there's barely contained panic. The kind of panic that comes from discovering that everything you thought you knew about the universe might be wrong. Omnarch's usual radiant glow has dimmed to what can only be described as a nervous flicker. His voice, once commanding and authoritative, now carries the tremor of someone who spent 3 months having their entire worldview systematically dismantled. Council members, he begins, consulting a datapad with the kind of desperate attention usually reserved for emergency medical procedures. We need to discuss the developments that have occurred since our last regular session. Vexstar rises from his seat, but his usual graceful dignity has been replaced by something that looks suspiciously like shell shock. His scales, normally a beautiful iridescent rainbow, have settled into a dull mottled gray that suggests either deep depression or complete system failure. The Zentari situation, he reports, his voice flat and mechanical, has been resolved. The way he says resolved makes it sound like a terminal diagnosis. It turns out, Vexstar continues, staring at his notes like they might spontaneously combust, that the human was correct. The Zentari Federation wasn't actually interested in controlling the Beta Sector trade routes. They wanted, he pauses here, visibly struggling with the words, they wanted the galaxy to acknowledge their cultural contributions. Specifically, they wanted their poetry included in the Galactic Cultural Archive. Captain Zilthos makes a sound that might be a laugh, but it's the kind of laugh that suggests someone is questioning their grip on reality. Poetry, 200 years of conflict, billions of credits in military expenditure, entire star systems militarized, and they wanted their poetry in a library. The resolution, Vexstar continues with the enthusiasm of someone reading their own death warrant, required a single diplomatic meeting. One meeting. Ambassador Kellix sat down with the Zentari cultural minister, listened to some poems, expressed genuine appreciation for their artistic traditions, and offered to sponsor their inclusion in the archive. The chamber fills with the kind of silence that usually accompanies natural disasters. The Zentari were so grateful, Vexstar adds, his voice getting progressively more hollow, that they've not only ceased all hostilities but have volunteered to provide free cultural exchange programs throughout the disputed sectors. The region is now more peaceful than it has been in 3 centuries. Omnarch's glow flickers again. And the Gamma Quadrant situation. Zilthos rises, and for the first time in recorded history, the mighty Corvin warrior looks uncertain. His forearms gesture helplessly as he speaks, like he's trying to grasp something that keeps slipping away. The employment initiative, he says, each word sounding like it physically hurts, has been effective. He pulls up a holographic display showing crime statistics for the Gamma Quadrant. The numbers are falling so fast they look like they're in free fall. We offered legitimate employment to the individuals engaged in piracy operations. 93% of them accepted immediately. The remaining 7%, well, it turns out they weren't actually pirates either. They were freelance security contractors who had been hired by the mining companies to protect their assets but were classified as pirates due to a filing error in the bureaucratic system. Zilthos sits down heavily, his military bearing completely demolished. Piracy in the Gamma Quadrant has decreased by 99.7%. The region is now safer than most core worlds. And it cost us less than what we were spending on military operations in a single month. The mining rights, Omnarch asks, though he sounds like he's not sure he wants to know. The Zelkari representative flashes in a pattern that translates roughly to existential dread mixed with grudging admiration. Through their translator, they report, the rotation system has been implemented. All legal challenges have been withdrawn. The companies involved have expressed satisfaction with the arrangement and have praised the efficiency of the new system. Several have asked why we didn't think of this decades ago. Omnarch's glow has now dimmed to barely visible. How long did it take to implement? 6 days. The chamber erupts in what can only be described as controlled chaos. Dozens of species are trying to process the same impossible reality. Problems that had defined galactic politics for centuries have been solved in months using methods so simple they could be explained to a child. This is a crisis, declares Ambassador Thylex of the Rigel Commerce Guild, her tentacles writhing in what passes for panic among her species. Our entire governmental structure is based on the principle that galactic problems require complex solutions. If any species can solve these issues with basic communication and elementary logic, then what do they need us for? Exactly, Vexstar agrees, his scales shifting to a color that suggests deep philosophical anguish. We've spent millennia positioning ourselves as the indispensable architects of galactic civilization. Our authority derives from our ability to navigate complex political situations that lesser species cannot comprehend. But if the situations aren't actually complex, then we're just bureaucrats. Zilthos finishes grimly. Overpaid, overpowered bureaucrats who've been making simple problems complicated for our own benefit. The panic is spreading. Representatives from dozens of species are realizing that their entire political identity has been built on a foundation of artificial complexity. They've been the galactic equivalent of mechanics who create problems so they can charge you to fix them. Where is the human now? Omnarch asks, his voice barely above a whisper. He's in his assigned quarters, Vexstar reports. He hasn't spoken in council since that first day. He just sits there taking notes on those primitive paper napkins, listening to our debates. What kind of notes? We don't know, but he's been through a lot of napkins. The chamber falls silent again, but this time it's the silence of prey animals who suddenly realize they're being hunted. Somewhere in this massive space station, a human is sitting quietly with a stack of napkins, observing the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy as they stumble through problems that probably have embarrassingly simple solutions. He's studying us, Omnarch realizes, his glow finally settling into a steady, terrified blue. He's watching how we operate, identifying our patterns, figuring out what we're doing wrong. How many other problems do we have that might be simple? Thylex asks, her tentacles now tied in knots. Nobody wants to answer that question. The Galactic Council maintains a database of over 14,000 ongoing conflicts, disputes, and administrative challenges. 14,000 problems that justify the existence of the most elaborate governmental system in galactic history. What if most of them are just as easy to solve as the ones Jake already fixed? We need to create new problems, Zilthos declares suddenly, his military mind snapping into tactical mode. Complex problems. Problems that actually require sophisticated solutions. You want to manufacture crises? Vexstar asks, his diplomatic training warring with his panic. Do you have a better idea? If we don't give ourselves something genuinely complicated to manage, the member species are going to start asking why they need a galactic council at all. The chamber buzzes with nervous energy as representatives begin discussing the logistics of creating artificial complexity. They're like a group of con artists who've been caught in their own con and are trying to figure out how to keep the game going. And somewhere in the depths of Concordia Prime, Jake Morrison sits in his quarters, surrounded by napkins covered in diagrams, flowcharts and notes. He's been listening to 3 months of council debates, watching the galaxy's most advanced civilizations tie themselves in knots over problems that could be solved with a phone call and a handshake. He's got a lot of napkins. And a lot of ideas. 6 months after Jake Morrison first walked into the Galactic Council chambers, Omnarch stands at the center of what was once the most prestigious governmental body in known space. His glow has been reduced to a barely perceptible shimmer, like a dying flashlight. Around him, the greatest minds of dozens of civilizations sit in various states of what can only be described as cosmic depression. The holographic displays that once showed complex political situations now display unemployment statistics for former diplomats. Because as it turns out, when you solve problems instead of managing them, you don't need nearly as many people to run a government. Fellow beings, Omnarch begins, his voice carrying the weight of someone delivering a eulogy for an entire way of life. We gather here today to confront a truth that challenges the very foundation of our existence. He gestures weakly at the empty seats scattered throughout the chamber. Half the council representatives have already gone home, their positions deemed unnecessary now that their centuries-old crises have been resolved with what their constituents are calling refreshing efficiency. We have been living a lie, Omnarch continues, his philosophical training finally serving a purpose other than making simple things sound complicated. For 3 millennia, we have convinced ourselves and the galaxy that we were indispensable. We believed that our intelligence, our experience, our sophisticated understanding of galactic politics made us uniquely qualified to guide civilization. Vexstar, whose scales have now settled into a permanent shade of beige that suggests complete emotional exhaustion, raises one clawed hand. We told ourselves that problems were complex because we wanted them to be complex. We needed them to be complex. Because if they weren't complex, then any species with basic communication skills and common sense could solve them. Any species, Captain Zilthos adds bitterly, like humans. As if summoned by the mention of his species, Jake Morrison walks into the chamber. He's still wearing jeans and sneakers, still carrying what appears to be a brown bag lunch, and still looking like someone who accidentally wandered into the wrong meeting. The difference is that now, instead of looking out of place, everyone else looks ridiculous compared to him. He takes his seat at the table, pulls out his latest napkin, and begins eating what smells suspiciously like a tuna sandwich. The most powerful beings in the galaxy watch him with the kind of fascination usually reserved for observing natural disasters in progress. The human arrives, Omnarch announces unnecessarily, his voice carrying a mix of dread and resignation. Jake Morrison, whose simple questions have unraveled the careful complexity of galactic governance, whose practical solutions have rendered centuries of diplomatic expertise obsolete, whose napkin-based note-taking system has proven more effective than our most advanced analytical systems. Jake looks up from his sandwich, apparently surprised to find everyone staring at him. Oh hey, sorry I'm late. Traffic was weird around the docking bay. The casual normalcy of this statement somehow makes it even more terrifying. Here's a being who has single-handedly destabilized the political order of the galaxy, and he's concerned about traffic. We have been discussing, Omnarch continues with the forced calm of someone standing on a crumbling ledge, the implications of your contributions to galactic governance. Oh, those worked out, Jake asks, taking another bite of his sandwich. That's great. I wasn't sure if anyone would actually try them. They worked out, Vexstar confirms in the tone of someone admitting to a war crime. All of them, perfectly, efficiently, at a fraction of the cost we've been spending on traditional solutions. Jake nods approvingly. Cool. Sometimes the obvious answer is obvious for a reason. There's a long pause as the council members contemplate the devastating simplicity of this statement. They've spent their entire careers avoiding obvious answers because obvious answers don't require experts to implement them. The galaxy is pleased with these developments, Omnarch says carefully. Many worlds have expressed gratitude for the improved peace and stability. Some have asked whether the council might consider addressing other long-standing issues using similar approaches. Makes sense, Jake agrees, pulling out his napkin and consulting his notes. There are definitely some other things that seem pretty straightforward. The color drains from every alien face that's capable of losing color. Those that can't lose color find other ways to express existential terror. Other things, Vexstar asks weakly. Oh yeah, Jake says, apparently oblivious to the panic he's causing. I've been sitting here for 6 months listening to you guys debate stuff, and there are some pretty obvious solutions floating around. The food distribution problem in the Outer Rim could be fixed with better logistics coordination. The energy crisis in the Vega system would be solved by just connecting their power grid to their neighbors who have excess capacity. The whole trade language barrier thing could be handled with standardized translation protocols instead of requiring every species to learn 47 different languages. He flips to another section of his napkin. Oh, and that territorial dispute in the Andromeda Gateway region. Both sides want the same thing, they just don't realize it because they're arguing about different aspects of the same issue. 5 minutes of actual conversation would probably clear that right up. The silence that follows is the kind of silence that accompanies the heat death of the universe. Jake, Omnarch says slowly, his voice barely above a whisper, how many problems do you think could be solved this way? Jake shrugs, looking around the chamber with the expression of someone who's genuinely trying to be helpful. I don't know. Most of them, I've only been paying attention for 6 months, but it seems like most of the stuff you guys argue about comes down to people not talking to each other, or making assumptions about what other people want, or getting so caught up in the process that you forget what you're actually trying to accomplish. He takes another bite of his sandwich, chews thoughtfully, then adds, plus a lot of the problems seem to exist mainly because solving them would put people out of work, which is kind of backwards when you think about it. The chamber is so quiet that you can hear the hum of the life support systems. Somewhere in that hum is the sound of an entire governmental philosophy collapsing under the weight of its own absurdity. Jake finishes his sandwich, wipes his hands on yet another napkin, and looks around the table with the kind of genuine curiosity that has become the council's greatest fear. So he says, settling back in his chair with the comfortable air of someone who has no idea he's just delivered the final blow to galactic bureaucracy as they know it. About that waste management job you offered us. Every alien in the chamber freezes. Some stop breathing entirely. Others make small whimpering sounds that their species has never made before. Because they all realize, in that moment, what Jake Morrison is really asking. He's not asking about garbage collection. He's asking if humanity can take a look at the rest of their problems, all 14,000 of them, with their napkins and their common sense and their dangerous habit of asking what people actually want. The camera pulls back slowly, showing the Galactic Council chamber in all its ridiculous, over-engineered glory. At the center sits a human in blue jeans, surrounded by the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, all of whom are having the same terrifying realization. The most dangerous weapon in the universe isn't a planet-cracking bomb or a reality-warping drive or a consciousness-dissolving ray. It's a human with a napkin who keeps asking simple questions. And somewhere in the depths of space, 14,000 problems that have stumped galactic civilization for centuries are about to meet their match. Basic human common sense. The galaxy will never be the same. And frankly, it's probably better that way.